Mike. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about tuples in Python. Now, a tuple is a type of data structure, which basically means it's a container where we can store different values. Now, if you're familiar with lists in Python, a tuple is actually very similar to a list. It's basically a structure where we can store multiple pieces of information. But a tuple has a few key differences from lists that we're going to talk about in this tutorial. First thing I want to do is I want to show you, though, how to create a tuple. So I can come down here and I can create a tuple, and one of the most common examples of tuples is coordinates. So let's say I had a series of like XY coordinates. I could create a variable called coordinates, and I'm just going to set this equal to an open and close parentheses. And whenever we want to create a tuple inside of Python, we're going to use these open and closed parentheses. And inside of here, inside of these parentheses, we're going to put the values that we want to store. So I could, for example, put a list of numbers. So this could be like my coordinates. I could have like 4 and 5. So this would be my tuple with coordinates inside of it. And one of the things about tuples that makes them unique is a tuple is immutable. And you'll hear that word a lot when we're talking about tuples, immutable. It basically means that the tuple can't be changed or modified. Once we create our tuple up here, you cannot modify it, you cannot change it, you can't add elements to it, you can't erase elements from it, you can't change any of the elements inside the tuple. What you see is what you get. Once you create the tuple, it's as it is, it can't change. So I could come down here and I could print out some of the attributes inside the tuple, and the way I can access them is just by using an open and closed square bracket, and in here I can pass in a index. So tuples are indexed starting at 0, so technically we would say that 4 is at index position 1, 4 is at index position 0, and 5 is at index position 1. So if I said coordinates 0, now it should print out 4. And down here, we're printing out 4. So if I wanted to print out that 5, we can just put a 1 inside of those square brackets, and now we'll print out that 5. So I can access the elements inside of a tuple. I can easily access each entry, but if I was to come over here and try to change one of the elements, so if I said coordinates and coordinates 1, and I tried to set it equal to something else like 10, Python's actually going to give us an error when we run this program. So I'm going to run the program. You see we get this error. It says type error tuple object does not support item assignment because it's immutable, because we can't change it. So that's basically what tuples are, how we can create them. And you know, a tuple, like I said, it's very simple. You just create it and then you have it. And now I want to talk to you guys about a common topic in Python, which is the difference between tuples and lists. So remember, a list is basically doing the same thing. A list, if we wanted to create a list, we would just use square brackets instead of those parentheses. And if I was using a list, I could assign different values to it. I could basically mutate any of the elements. I could add, delete, modify, change, whatever I wanted with the list. But with a tuple, we can't do that. And that's sort of the basic difference. And really, Python doesn't say anything more than that. It basically just says like one of them's immutable, one of them's not. But in practical use cases, generally people will use tuples for data that's never going to change. So you'll store data inside of a tuple when that data doesn't need to be mutated. That's why something like coordinates is such a good candidate for a tuple, because once you have coordinates, like, we're probably not going to modify them, right? We might add other coordinates. So for example, if I wanted, I could create a list of tuples. So I could say like 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe we have some other coordinates like 80, 34. So here I have a list, and inside of it we have these tuples. But remember, these tuples can't be modified. The values can't be changed. So really, it's just a case-by-case basis. I would say by a huge majority, you're going to be using lists most of the time. Tuples are more of a niche. You know, they're used in more special situations. But there are plenty of situations where you want to use tuples. So if you're in a situation where you want to store data that can't be changed or mutated, then tuples are the way to go. So yeah, that's just some basics about tuples, some basics about the difference between lists and tuples. And so a tuple is a great thing to add into your Python repertoire. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using functions in Python. Now, a function is basically just a collection of code which performs a specific task. So I can take a bunch of lines of code that are basically doing one thing, I can put them inside of a function, and then when I wanted to do that task or do that one thing that the function was doing, I can just call the function. And so functions really help you to organize your code a lot better. They allow you to kind of break up your code into different, little chunks that are doing different things, and they're really just awesome. So functions are like a very core concept when we're talking about programming in Python. So I'm going to show you guys how to create an awesome function today. Let's say for the purposes of this tutorial, we want to create a function that says hi to the user. So the one task that our function performs is basically just saying hi to whoever is writing the program. So over here, if I want to write a function, the first thing I have to use is a keyword in Python. It's called def, so def. And basically when Python sees this keyword, it's going to say, oh, okay, this person wants to use a function. And so after we type out def, we need to give this function a name. So just like when we are creating variables, we give them descriptive names, we also want to do the same thing with functions. So if I'm creating a function, I can just give it a specific name which basically says like what it's doing. So we're going to create a function that says hi. So I'm just going to call this function say hi, just like that. And once we type out the name of the function, and so also I could type out say hi with no underscore, or I could type out say hi with an underscore. Both are considered like good practices in Python. A lot of times if you just have a simple like two-word function like this, you don't need to put an underscore, but we could put an underscore there if we wanted. After we type out the name of the function, I'm just going to type an open and close parentheses, and then I'm going to type a colon. And basically what this is doing is it's saying to Python like, all right, all the code that comes after this line is going to be inside of our function. And in order to write code that's going to end up being inside the function, we actually have to indent it. So over here, you'll notice that when I clicked enter, my text editor automatically indented the text. So it's automatically like using this indent here. And that's kind of like one of the rules in Python is like the code that goes inside of this function needs to be indented. So if I was to write some code like out here, this is no longer going to be considered inside the function. So you can see as I type out code, and obviously this isn't real code, but as I type text over here that's indented, this little like marker over here is basically saying like, oh yeah, that's inside the function. But then when I write code over here that is like not at the same indentation level as this stuff, it's no longer considering it inside the function. So that's just a little thing. Any code inside this function needs to be indented. All right, so our function is just going to say hi to the user. So I'm just going to have it print out some text. It's going to say hello user. So this is a very simple function. Obviously we just have one line of code, and inside of a function you could have as many lines of code as you want, but for our purposes we only need one line in order to perform our function. So now all we have to do is call this function. So if I want to execute the code inside of this function, I have to do something called calling it. So if I was to just run my program as it is right now, I'm just going to run it. You'll see that nothing happens over here, right? Even though this function is printing out hello user, when I run the program, it's not doing it. And that's because the code inside of a function isn't going to get executed by default. The code inside of a function is only going to get executed when we specify that we want to execute it. And in order to do that, we're going to have to do something called calling the function. So in order to call the function, you basically just type out the function's name and those open and close parentheses. So I'm just going to type out say hi and open and close parentheses. And now when we run this program again, you'll see that it prints out hello user. So we're executing the code inside of the function. And I want to show you guys just one more thing here, just talking to you guys about how these functions actually work. So up here I'm going to print top, and then down here I'm going to print bottom. So I want to show you guys the flow of these functions inside the program. So when I run this program, you'll see we print out top, hello user, and then bottom. So essentially what's happening is when Python goes through and executes this program, it goes over here to this first line. It says, okay, we want to print out the word top, and then it goes down here and it says, okay, we want to execute the say hi function. So Python actually jumps up and it goes over to this say hi function, and it's going to execute all of the code inside of this function. So it's going to go through, execute all of this code, and then once it's done executing all of the code in the function, it's going to jump back down here and it's going to move on to the next line, which is bottom. So that's kind of like the flow of functions. Again, with functions, generally when we're naming these functions, you want them to be named in all lowercase. And usually when we're naming stuff in Python, if there's 2 or more words, we're going to use an underspace or an underscore in between them. So I could write this out as say underscore hi. But in a lot of situations though, if I have a function like this where the name is really short, it might just be easier to leave it without an underscore. But why don't we just put an underscore in there just to be super Python official. Alright, so now we can actually make these functions a little bit more powerful. And what we can do is we can give them information. So a lot of times when we write a function, we're going to want to have additional information that gets passed in. And these are called parameters. So a parameter is a piece of information that we give to the function. So over here, I can actually specify that this function needs to receive some parameters. So I can basically say like, hey, if you're going to call this function, you need to give us some information. You need to give us some parameters. And all I have to do that is just type out the name of the parameter that I want to receive. So why don't we allow the code calling this function to tell it what name to say hi to. Up here I can just say name. And basically what this means is it means whenever I call this say hi function, we have to give it a name. So down here, if I was to call this, I have to include a name in here. So I can say like Mike. And what we can do now is we can actually access this parameter or this variable inside of our function. So I could come over here and instead of saying hello user, I could say hello name. And basically what this is going to do is it's just going to say hello to whatever name got passed in here. So I'm actually going to copy this and we will do this twice. So I'll say hello Mike, hello Steve. And now when I run this program, you'll see that instead of just saying hello user, it's saying hello to whichever name I passed into the function. So that's why this can be really useful, right? We can give the function information, and depending on the information we give it, it'll perform its task a little bit differently. I can also include more than one parameter. So you can, technically you could have like as many parameters as you want. So I can put another one in here, we can say age. And now I'm gonna have to pass in an age along with these. So I'm just gonna pass in an age and pass in an age for down here. And I'm just gonna pass in strings. So we can say hello name, you are age. So I'm passing in two pieces of information, and now when we run this program, it's going to call the function and it's going to use both of those pieces of information. So I'll say hello Mike, you are 35, hello Steve, you are 70. So essentially we're writing out this one line of code which just prints out like hello to someone, and we're allowing this function to receive two parameters, so the name and the age. And depending on the name and the age, the function is going to print out hello a little bit differently. And that's kind of the beauty of using functions. So you could pass anything you want into a function. So for example, I could pass in a integer instead of a string for the age. So like I could pass in a number. The only difference is over here we're going to have to convert this into a string. But it's going to work just the same. So you could pass in strings, numbers, booleans, arrays. You can really pass any type of data into a function and it's going to work. So you can see here we get the same result. So that's the basics of functions, and as you go through with Python, you're gonna be using functions more and more. And generally, it's a good idea to break your code up into different functions. So whenever you have like a grouping of code that's designed to perform a specific task, that's usually a good candidate to be put inside of a function.